Washington's most racist politician begging for forgiveness from Bumpy Johnson. The answer will shock you. But before we dive into this incredible story that the government tried to bury for decades, let me ask you something. What would you do if the most powerful racist in Congress personally declared war on your community? Most people would write letters, maybe organize protests. Bumpy Johnson chose a different path. Washington, D.C., November 15, 1951. Congressman Richard "Iron Dick" Morrison sat in his mahogany-paneled office reviewing the speech that would end Bumpy Johnson's empire forever. Morrison, 58, was the chairman of the House Urban Affairs Committee, and he'd just drafted the most devastating piece of anti-Harlem legislation in American history. The Morrison Act would cut all federal funding to any neighborhood with excessive criminal activity. Translation: starve Harlem into submission. Morrison had spent 3 years crafting this plan. 3 years studying every legal loophole, every constitutional argument, every way to legally suffocate the community that Bumpy Johnson called home. And in 48 hours, he'd present it to Congress. Morrison thought he was untouchable, a third-generation politician from Virginia's oldest family, protected by Senate allies, backed by unlimited corporate money, shielded by institutional power. He was wrong, because 800 miles north in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson was reading the exact same document Morrison thought was secret, word for word, line for line, including the private notes Morrison had written in the margins. How did Bumpy get classified congressional documents? That's not the shocking part of this story. The shocking part is what he did next. Bumpy didn't call lawyers, didn't organize protests, didn't contact civil rights leaders. Instead, he opened his phone book and made exactly 7 phone calls. Each conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Each person he called had never heard of the Morrison Act. But within 36 hours, Congressman Morrison's entire world was collapsing. Phone call number 1, 2:47 p.m., November 15th. Mr. Henderson, this is someone who knows about your arrangement with Congressman Morrison, the defense contracts, the no-bid deals, the money flowing through your construction company that never actually builds anything. Henderson Manufacturing had been receiving mysterious federal contracts for 2 years, paper-only deals worth millions, Morrison's signature on every approval, and suddenly, someone knew exactly how the system worked. Phone call number 2, 3:12 p.m. Mrs. Patterson, your husband's campaign contributions, the ones that exceed legal limits by 400%, Morrison's been covering for you, but that coverage just expired. Morrison's largest donors learned their illegal contributions were about to be exposed, not eventually, immediately. Phone call number 3, 3:28 p.m. Judge Whitman, those cases you dismissed for Morrison's friends, the ones where evidence mysteriously disappeared, someone has copies of everything. Federal judges who'd been providing Morrison with courtroom favors discovered their corruption was documented in detail. But the genius of Bumpy's plan wasn't just about exposing Morrison's corruption. Anyone could do that with enough investigation. The genius was the timing. Because November 17th, 1951 wasn't just when Morrison planned to destroy Harlem. November 17th was also the day Morrison's daughter was getting married to the son of Virginia's governor. In the most publicized political wedding of the decade, every major newspaper would be covering the event, every photographer in Washington would be present, and Morrison's entire political legacy would be on display as he walked his daughter down the aisle. That's when Bumpy decided to destroy him. November 16th, 6:30 a.m. Morrison woke up to find FBI agents at his door, not arresting him, just asking questions about Henderson Manufacturing, about campaign finance violations, about his relationship with certain federal judges. The FBI had received an anonymous tip, along with detailed documentation, photos of private meetings, recorded phone conversations, financial records going back 3 years. Morrison tried to dismiss it as harassment, political opponents playing dirty. But the evidence was too specific, too accurate, too damning. By noon, the Washington Post was running a front-page story about corruption allegations against the congressman who'd promised to clean up urban crime. Morrison called his lawyer. His lawyer said the evidence looked legitimate and recommended immediate damage control. Morrison called his political allies. They said they needed to distance themselves until the investigation concluded. Morrison called his corporate backers. They said their support was temporarily suspended pending legal review. In 6 hours, Morrison's entire support system had evaporated. But Bumpy wasn't finished. November 17th, 10 a.m. Morrison's daughter's wedding was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 10 a.m., Morrison received a phone call that changed everything. "Congressman Morrison, this is Ellsworth Johnson, from Harlem, the man whose community you're trying to destroy." Morrison later told associates this was the most frightening conversation of his political career. Not because Bumpy threatened him, but because of how calmly Bumpy explained exactly what was happening. "Mr. Morrison, your wedding is in 4 hours. Every newspaper in America will be watching. Every photographer will be taking pictures. And in approximately 30 minutes, every guest at your daughter's wedding will receive a detailed package documenting your corruption over the past 3 years. Morrison said this was impossible. The wedding was private. The guest list was secret. Bumpy's response was simple. "Nothing is secret if you know who to ask, Mr. Morrison. Your daughter's guests will receive copies of your illegal business deals. Your wife's bridge club will see evidence of your campaign finance violations. Your son-in-law's family will read about your arrangement with federal judges. And every reporter covering this beautiful family celebration will have a very different story to write." Morrison begged Bumpy to reconsider, said he'd withdraw the legislation, said he'd never target Harlem again. Bumpy's answer became legendary in both criminal and political circles. "Mr. Morrison, my people don't negotiate with racists. We educate them." At 10:30 a.m., exactly as Bumpy had promised, packages began arriving at the homes of every wedding guest. Detailed evidence of Morrison's corruption, financial records, meeting transcripts, photographs of illegal activities. By 11 a.m., Morrison's phone was ringing constantly. Guests were canceling. Political allies were demanding explanations. The media was asking for statements about the corruption allegations. By noon, the wedding venue was surrounded by reporters asking about Morrison's illegal activities instead of celebrating his daughter's marriage. Morrison's daughter, who'd spent a year planning her perfect wedding, watched her special day become a public humiliation for her father. The wedding proceeded. But instead of celebration photos, newspapers ran pictures of a disgraced congressman surrounded by scandal on what should have been his family's happiest day. Morrison never recovered. The FBI investigation resulted in federal charges. He lost re-election by the largest margin in Virginia's political history. His business associates abandoned him. His political career ended in disgrace. But the most shocking part of this story isn't how quickly Morrison fell. It's what Bumpy Johnson did 3 days later. November 20th, 1951. Morrison received one final phone call from Harlem. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter's wedding gift just arrived at her new home, with a note explaining why her father's political career had to end, but wishing her happiness in her marriage. Because your war was with me, not with her." Morrison later told friends this was when he truly understood who he'd been fighting, not just a criminal, not just a gangster, but someone who understood power better than anyone in Washington, someone who could destroy you completely, but who would still send your daughter a wedding gift. Because that's how real power works. Morrison spent his remaining years in political exile. He never spoke publicly about Bumpy Johnson, never tried to retaliate, never attempted a political comeback, because he'd learned the most important lesson of his life. Some people you don't fight, you respect them, or you disappear. The Morrison Act never came to a vote. Harlem kept its federal funding. And every politician in Washington learned that targeting Bumpy Johnson's community carried consequences that went far beyond anything they'd imagined. Morrison died in 1967, 16 years after his encounter with Bumpy Johnson. His obituary mentioned his controversial political career, but never explained why one of Congress's most powerful men had suddenly become irrelevant overnight. The answer died with Morrison, but the lesson lived on. In Washington, they still tell the story of the congressman who tried to destroy Harlem and ended up begging forgiveness from the most powerful criminal in America. Not because he was tortured, not because he was threatened, but because Bumpy Johnson showed him what real power looked like. And sometimes, the most devastating education comes not from violence, but from precision.